The Trudeau government took to social media recently to push the message that your rights are in danger if a Pierre Poilievre government is elected. Now, to chat about this in more detail is political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, we've heard the fear-mongering from the Liberals before, especially when it comes to abortion, but now they're claiming that everyone's rights are at stake?
Yeah, and they've been pushing the abortion message this month as well. Make no mistake about it. The month of May, the month of Mother's Day, is the month that the Liberals always go hard on abortion. Happy Mother's Day. Let's celebrate abortion. It's a very odd concept for me. But, on the Thursday before Mother's Day, there's always the March for Life on Parliament Hill. You've been there. You've covered that. It's normally the biggest peaceful protest on Parliament Hill each and every year. And it's not treated well by most people in the media. And so the Liberals spend the week leading up to the March for Life and the week after going on and on and on about abortion. And this year's no different. They seem to be extending it, though. I mean, Justin Trudeau went to New Brunswick last week and was talking all about how clinic, I believe it's Clinic 554, and I might have the numbers wrong, but I believe it's Clinic 554, is no longer being funded. And that's a national disgrace. Well, it's a private clinic. And the New Brunswick government says they don't need the private clinic to provide the services required by the Canada Health Act. But, the Trudeau Liberals, who are all against private clinics delivering public health care, if it's to replace your cataracts, Hal, or replace your knee or your mother's knee or what have you, are suddenly all about private clinics when it comes to abortion. So, yeah, they played up that part. But this year, it's something different. A couple of weeks ago, I'm sure we talked about it at the time, Pierre Poilievre spoke to the Canadian Police Association, and he was discussing dangerous offenders and multiple murderers being in medium security prisons or having their sentences overturned, like Alexandre Bissonnette, the man who carried out the Quebec City mosque attack. He was given 6 consecutive life sentences. And the Supreme Court upheld a lower court decision that said that's cruel and unusual punishment. You cannot actually give somebody a sentence that long. And Poilievre said, you know what? I don't care. I think that multiple murderers, dangerous offenders should be in maximum security. And if you're like this guy, you should only come out of prison in a box. And we'll pass laws and we'll use whatever tools the Constitution gives us to make sure they stay. That's a hint to the notwithstanding clause. So they're talking about multiple murderers, and the Liberals are saying that threatening to keep multiple murderers in jail means they're coming for your rights. As much as I'm a critic of the Liberal Party of Canada, Hal, I don't think that their core constituency, their core voting base, is a bunch of multiple murderers and dangerous offenders. I think that they're on the wrong side of the Canadian public on this. I think they're on the wrong side of many of their own voters on this. And it's a desperate attempt to try and stay relevant, to try and say to Canadians, hey, vote for us, or you're going to have all your rights stripped away by this guy that wants to keep murderers in jail.
Brian, the Speaker of the House of Commons is in hot water yet again, this time over partisan language promoting an event. What did Greg Fergus do now?
So the Liberals have a section on their website that advertises all of their upcoming fundraising events. They call it part of their open government policy. I mean, they won't tell you what the government's actually doing, but they'll tell you when their fundraising events are. And there was one for Speaker Fergus. Look, he's an MP like every other MP. Yes, he's the Speaker, but he still has to fundraise to be able to run a campaign come next election. And speakers have done this in the past. But the language promoting this event made Pierre Poilievre sound like the devil incarnate. And he, this is not the language the Speaker should be using. You can easily sell out a fundraiser without using over-the-top language to describe your opponents. But Pierre Poilievre would, ruin healthcare. He would strip away your rights. All these things that we're talking about. This is what was in the language to promote this. And so Chris Workington, Conservative MP from Alberta, up north of Edmonton Way, he raised the issue and he's like, hey, wait a minute. Like, this is the third partisan event you've had. This is, another example of you not being the nonpartisan voice for the whole Commons, which is what the Speaker should be. And one of the people on the front bench that sits just down from Pierre Poilievre on the Conservative benches is former leader and former House Speaker Andrew Scheer. Now, people can think what they will about Andrew Scheer as a person or as a party leader when he headed up the Conservatives. I remember having a conversation with Peter Milliken, who's one of the people who held the job longest, Liberal MP from Kingston. And I asked him what he thought of Scheer, and he said Scheer was an impeccable speaker, great rulings, stayed above the fray, did not get partisan. You cannot say that about Greg Fergus. And so the Conservatives are raising this issue. The fundraising event has been taken off the Liberal website. I think Fergus is going to be in hot water. Unfortunately, I think he's going to stay in the job because he was put in there by the Liberals to do their bidding. And he's been doing it. Greg Fergus, as I've told you before, is a guy I met when he was on school board. I thought he was a decent, honorable man. He has not performed that way as Speaker. He has been the Trudeau Liberal PMO lapdog in the Speaker's chair. And it's very disconcerting to see.
Brian, the House of Commons resumed today, and a big topic of discussion is the budget. Apparently, the budget legislation does not include the Liberals' big promise of the capital gains tax changes. Are the Liberals maybe backing away from that promise?
Kind of strange that you'd make a huge promise and then not put it in the legislation, right? So, look, for people that don't follow politics in and out to the same degree that you and I do, Hal, you present the budget, and the Liberals presented their budget on April 16th. And that's when the finance minister stands up in the House of Commons. They give a big speech. They detail what they want to do. They table the document with the House, which means that it is presented to the House. It is entered into the official record. Here's our spending plan. Here's what we're going to do. And the big promise in there that they hadn't told anybody about, they told them everything else. They didn't tell anybody about the capital gains tax, changing the inclusion rate from 50% to 66%. That's something that's going to hit small business owners, tradespeople that run their own shop, convenience store owners. You own a cottage, a cabin, chalet, whatever you want to call it. Your family owns one of those and you want to pass it down. It's going to hit you. It's going to hit doctors. It's going to hit all kinds of people. But the Trudeau Liberals try to make it sound like, oh, it's just going to hit the monopoly man with the top hat and the monocle and the uber wealthy. And if you're not the uber wealthy like Galen Weston, you don't have to worry about it. Well, that's not the case. And they've faced incredible pushback on this. So April 16th, they present their budget. May 1st, they table the legislation to enable or enact the budget measures. But the capital gains tax isn't in there. You would think maybe that might mean they're backing away from it, but so far, no, they're not. Justin Trudeau has spent the last 3 weeks after the legislation was tabled defending this. He's put out a video talking about how great the capital gains tax is, and this is fairness for every generation. It's class war, it's intergenerational economic warfare that he's playing at. All of these different factors are at play, but he seems committed to going ahead with it. But they're also concerned about the pushback from doctors, and they don't want to be responsible for a flash of retirement from doctors or doctors leaving. So they're trying to find a way to make changes, but not get the $20 billion in extra money that they're expecting and that they've already spent.
Our Prime Minister is in Philadelphia, Brian. Justin Trudeau is speaking to a business group at a North American Union conference. What's the purpose of the trip?
Tip O'Neill, the Democratic Speaker of the House back in the 80s, is famous for popularizing the term all politics is local. So this may seem like an international trip, but it's a message for the folks back home. He's speaking to a business group, yes, but he's also speaking to the Service Employees International Union, SEIU. They're big in healthcare, especially out in the prairies. They're very big in the prairies. They're not quite as big here in Ontario or in Quebec, but BC, Alberta, Manitoba. I'm not including BC in the prairies. Don't worry, Hal. But it's a major union, and he's speaking to them to send a message not only to their members back here in Canada, but to the union, especially the public sector unions, writ large across the country. That's a big part of what this is. So he's. It might seem like an international message, but it's not. He's also, we're told, going to spend some time talking about, the possibility of a second Trump presidency. Well, if you're worried about a second Trump presidency, here is my view. Stop campaigning against Pierre Poilievre using Donald Trump because, let's say we don't have an election in this country until October 2025. The Americans are going to have theirs come hell or high water in early November of this year. So there's a good chance Donald Trump's going to win that. You've then got 10 months after Donald Trump is sworn in before we go to the polls. Do you think Donald Trump is really going to look kindly on Canada and our request to the White House and the next Trump administration if Justin Trudeau has spent the last year bashing Pierre Poilievre, saying he's just like Donald Trump, you can't trust him? This is bad politics by Trudeau all around, but it's par for the course. It goes back to the desperation we were talking about in how they're playing up the issue of charter rights being under attack. Everything right now, when you look at the polling numbers and how bad they are, it's about desperation. It's about trying to find that, small cadre of voters that they can pull back into their own fold.
Yeah, and according to Nanos, the Tories now have, a 20-point lead over the Justin Trudeau Liberals. Brian, the federal government announced a national auto strategy on combating auto theft over the long weekend. Auto thefts continue to rise all across the country now. Isn't this something the Trudeau government mentioned before?
I don't know how many times they've mentioned it now. It's a long-standing thing in covering politics. You show up to an event and there's cabinet ministers from this government or that government or multiple governments, and you get the news release handed to you before the politicians come out and speak, and you look and you go, is this new? Wait a minute, I think I've heard this before. And sometimes governments are upfront. They do what are called echo events. They make a big announcement, but then they want to localize it. And so, the Danielle Smith government makes an announcement at the Alberta legislature in Edmonton, but then they do an event in Calgary. Then they do an event in Lethbridge. Then they do an event in Red Deer. Those are echo announcements. You're trying to localize it. This isn't an echo announcement, Hal. This is another national announcement that they're going to do something about auto theft. Depending on where you are in the country, it varies. British Columbia, it's quite high. Alberta, it's definitely up, but not as high as here, where auto thefts are up 300%. And the big reason is, it's twofold. One, they're being exported via the Port of Montreal. Or secondly, and this is the new thing that we all have to worry about across the country, especially if you're looking to buy a used car. Car thieves are finding ways to change the VIN number or hide the VIN number. And so it looks like you are buying a legit used car. You register it with the Department of Transportation and everything's fine. And then suddenly your car's being repossessed. This is the latest horror story that I'm hearing about. People spending $60,000 on a decent used car and then finding out that they bought something that was stolen and they have no recourse. So all of these things are going on. But the 300% increase that I mentioned in Ontario, that's under the Trudeau government. And they've been warned about this for years now. They've been asked by Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives for more than a year to do something more, to do something concrete, including putting scanners at the Port of Montreal. Because the ones that are exported, the reason they're stealing them here is they come into the Toronto area, they steal the cars, they put them in a shipping container, or they drive them straight to Montreal, put them on a ship, and they're off to the Middle East or somewhere in Africa, and they're sold. So you got these two things going on of how the cars are gotten rid of. But auto theft is up dramatically. It's between 60 and 300%, depending on where you live in the country. That's costing all of us, higher prices for insurance, higher prices to get coverage. It's, and all of us wondering if we wake up in the morning, is the car going to be there if you've got outside parking? So this is a major issue. It's not one that they've dealt with in a serious manner. It's one they like making announcements about. But as one colleague at National Post, Chris Lilley, likes to say, with the Trudeau government, the announcement is the policy, and there's no policy beyond the announcement.
Brian, we spoke not long ago about how Canada Post refused to take part in the Trudeau government's gun buyback program. Has there been any movement on this now 4-year-old promise?
No, they banned, what was it? They said at the time 1,500 different types of firearms, mostly used for sport shooters. And then they added a bunch of hunting rifles and shotguns to the list over the next couple of years. And, I think I first reported on the Canada Post angle about a year and a half, 2 years ago. Then CBC got the letter and said, oh, look, Canada Post has said no. Canada Post has said no. The RCMP has said no. Municipal police forces across the country have said, no, we don't have the manpower to do this. The Ontario Provincial Police, the Quebec Provincial Police, they've all said, no, we can't do this. Are you going to pay us to hire extra people to do all this? And the answer from the federal government is, of course, no. So they've got a plan to buy back guns that they never owned. So it's not really a buyback. They've got plans to continue to ban them. And yet these guns continue to sit in your basement in the gun safe or in your neighbor's basement in the gun safe. They're not being used in crimes, but the Trudeau Liberals continue to portray it as if you don't re-elect them, gun crime's going to break out on every street corner in the country. I'm sorry, most Canadians probably already feel like that's the case, and the Trudeau Liberal promises and halfway actions haven't really solved the issue.
Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today from Toronto.
Thank you, Hal.